Bingo, we are good to go. So, hello, Heather Johnson. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited. Um,
As am I. This is going to be a fantastic conversation. I can already tell.
oh my goodness, and I've said it before in other podcasts, but I will say it again. So I have followed you for a little while now. So it's always that crazy moment where I get to connect with people that I've like I feel like I know you. I do in a way and I don't, but like it's that I've been following you and then to get this opportunity to kind of get like a front row of just chatting with you about Ayurveda and just all the things that encompass it is just oh, it's so exciting for me and I can't wait to dive in with you. So yes, thank you so much for doing this.
Well, I love it. And I love Ayurveda. So anytime I get to talk about it, people, if they're done listening, then I have to find someone new to talk to because it just is a topic that can keep going on and on. So I'm excited to be able to share with you and with your listeners about like the most amazing science in the universe, really.
Absolutely. So I came to Ayurveda, or I should say, I heard about it about 2 years ago or so, and I was working with someone, a spiritual kind of guidance. I want to say counselor, facilitator, and it was something that I really, really resonated with me, and I can't explain how or why, but it did, and it was all of it. It was the encompassing of our connection to nature, it was well-being, holistic living, nutrition, and just again how that all sort of connected, and it really resonated. And then so I had a lot of things going on at that time, and the way that I work, I heard about it, learned a bit about it, and then I wanted to immerse myself in it. That's how I kind of I my husband calls it the deep dive. He goes, "You going in?" I'm like, "I'm going into Ayurveda." He goes, "Okay, see ya." Like, I'll see you. I'll let you know when I come out in a couple of weeks. And then I I felt very overwhelmed at first
Hmm.
because it was a lot of information and I didn't, and again I was navigating it myself and I didn't understand some of the terminologies. I didn't the recipes because that's usually where I go is the food part. And I'm like I don't know how to do this, where to do this. And that's
Yeah.
how I stumbled upon your podcast because I was feeling very overwhelmed and I was listening to a few others and I still wasn't really following it. I wasn't able to follow it as well. And then when I found yours, it
Mhm.
clicked. Like it was something I was really able to digest and understand. And just the way that you explain it, your videos, like it was just it's amazing. It really is wonderful how you're able to break it down and your passion for it comes it comes through in the most amazing way. And yeah, it just that's how and then I kept going with it and sort of followed you in many ways. And then I've still kind of backed off a bit because actually for this conversation, because I want to ask so many questions. But then I've also noticed too in the past couple of months, other books I've been reading, some other practices that I've gotten into. Ayurveda is what honestly is coming
Mhm.
up kismically everywhere for me. I'm like, this is it. Like this is where I'm going. I've been doing my sound baths and reading some other books, and Ayurveda is what is being brought up with the people I'm connecting with and the texts I'm reading all the time. So
Yeah.
to start off this amazing, amazing conversation, break down for me or for us what is Ayurveda.
Well, first, I wanted to comment on something that you just said, and then I'll answer your question.
Okay.
I think the reason it keeps coming up for you and so many people, because 15 years ago, this was really unknown in the West. Even though there were Ayurvedic schools, there
Right.
were practitioners, it was somewhat like when yoga came to the
Mm,
West and it was still really new and nobody really understood it. And there was a lot of misconceptions about it. But I
right.
think the reason the Ayurveda is coming up so much is because as a global society and Western views are a little different, right, than Eastern views. But as a global society, there needs to be a level of consciousness that can hold and contain this knowledge. And
Mm,
so, if we're not at a place that we can actually absorb and use it, it's useless for that information to be available because it does overwhelm and it's also not appreciated at a level that it can be implemented. And when something is beautiful and sacred and it's cast in front of a people or a person that doesn't fully grasp what it is they're seeing or learning or understanding, They won't implement it, they'll discount it, and then it gets cast aside. So it really needed to have growth happen gradually, and also this rise in energy on a global level for us to be able to even contain it. So I think that's probably why you're seeing it come up. And the more that we are aware of things, from a Western term, we know that we have that reticular activator that in our brain that notices things. So it starts to notice when there's connections between what we've learned, and then suddenly you may see something that's not even labeled as Ayurveda, but you read and understand it and say, wait, that's Ayurveda. That's
Yeah.
Ayurvedic teaching. And I'm doing that all the time. I'm like, oh, that's totally Ayurveda. Oh, and it's nothing to do with it from a verbal standpoint, but the energy, the intention, the purpose behind it is all Ayurvedic medicine. So I just wanted to comment on that because I love that your journey has brought you there, because when you have found Ayurveda, it's because your energetic consciousness and your ability to absorb it is also there. So I never want people to be discouraged because there's a reason it came into their life at the time that it did. And it may not be that you're fully ready to absorb all of it 100%, but it does mean that there's a nudge from the universe or from God, whatever you want to call that, that's pushing you to grow and evolve. And that's why it's come into your life at the time it has. And it's usually when people need it, and it's not always when it's convenient. So
Yep.
there's my take on that. Now, Ayurveda itself, it's truly a medical science, but
Mhm.
it absorbs, or I should say encompasses, much more than that. So from a historical standpoint, it's 5,000 years plus old, and it's a science that was really handed down orally as a tradition for many, many, many generations. And we talk about these ancient rishis, or wise sages, that were seeking for a way to end human suffering. And
Yeah.
Ayurveda was direct inspiration. And there's a lot of viewpoints on this. There's a whole Ayurvedic philosophy that some people think, well, is that like Hinduism? But it's really not. It's more a philosophical understanding of where Ayurveda came from. And so that's a misconception. Often people think, well, you have to be Hindu, or I have to be a certain religion to follow Ayurveda. But it really isn't. I'm Christian. I'm 100% in with Ayurveda. And people sometimes are surprised by that. But I see no disconnect. I actually see that it's another piece of that puzzle. So, Ayurveda itself was developed in order to prevent human suffering, both physically but also emotionally. Because in Ayurveda, we know that human suffering doesn't start with the body, it starts with the spirit. And
Right.
so, when we're healing on a spiritual plane, we're also healing physically. And often it's difficult for people to work from the inside out, right?
Right.
It's a little more subjective. It's hard to know what you're accessing. If somebody, especially in the Western world, is very into physicality, they have a hard time even understanding, well, how do I connect with my consciousness? And I don't want to sit and breathe. I mean, that's like stressful for people. They don't want to do that. They are more like you. They want to go to, well, what should I eat?
Mhm.
Right? So it's a great place to start. And so most people who come into Ayurveda come from either like a yogic background or just a physical need. They need healing. So Ayurveda is truly a homegrown medicinal tradition, and it ties into yoga as a sister science. So we look at them kind of like they're two sides of one coin. And
Hmm.
so if you were to say like one sentence that encapsulates everything that is Ayurveda, Ayurveda is an ancient traditional medicine from India. It's over 5,000 years old. It's the grandparent of all traditional homeopathic medicine. And it focuses on our connection to physical and spiritual elements, not just within the body, but also within the world and nature around us. So when we look at Ayurveda, it's so big, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
But it's not as complicated as people think. And the words itself mean the science or knowledge of life. So it's really anything to do with being a living being.
Yeah.
That's what Ayurveda covers. So it's awesome. You can tell I love it. It's great
And
stuff.
I will say too, in starting to dive in more deeply, when you start to immerse yourself and understand more of the connection, I do agree that it becomes less intimidating. Like
Mhm.
now I feel I'm like, okay, I kind of get that. And it definitely, and then it just becomes, again, I'll speak for myself. It's just more exciting. Like it's
Yeah.
more exciting for me to understand how people and relationships and my connection to things, it just helps my own understanding of a greater purpose. It's like, wow, it really isn't all about me, but very much about how I'm connected to everyone and everything. And there is such I have like a release in that where it's not all about me. Oh, thank God. Like, like, oh, thank God. 'cause, like, oh, man, like,
Mhm.
it feels better if I may it just feels better to have that sort of that understanding. Now, can we talk about this is where it began for me, is as soon as I figured out my doshas.
Yeah.
So, what is, like, the term do and it comes up obviously, of course, it's such so important in Ayurveda, but what
Mhm.
is a dosha?
So this is what draws most people into Ayurveda because
Mhm.
frankly, as much as we don't want it to be all about ourselves, we kind of like things being all about ourselves.
Right.
And so this is the part of Ayurveda that is all about you.
Mm,
And it's fun to talk about doshas. And I think many people start there. There's a bigger conversation about elements and energy that goes into it. But a dosha itself, if you can think of it as like your constitution. Do you remember back in like the, early pioneerish times, country time when people lived on farms and they actually like, didn't have technology and phones and things like that. Well, that was something you would like, they'd say, oh, she just doesn't have a strong constitution. Her
mm,
constitution is weak. So I sometimes will think, okay, constitution, it's the way your body functions and
okay.
it's the way that your mind functions as well. So it's a way to categorize. And this was something that the ancient rishis did based upon what they were seeing coming up in people in order to help them treat them better. Because even though we're very unique as individuals, there's similarities between certain people, right? And you think, oh, well, this person's kind of like, again, those connections. This person's a little bit like this other person. What do they have in common? Oh, they have a lot of heat in the way they approach life. They're super fiery. They get angry really easily. So let's
Mm,
put them into a little category. Or this
right.
person tends to be really solid and sturdy and they're really immovable. They're very loyal and kind and you can count on this person, but they also don't like to do a lot. They might just kind of like hang out and sit, not super, ambitious sometimes in life. But this person's like this person, so we'll put them together. They have more earth energy. And then we have this group that's really willowy and they love change and they want to try all these new things and they're doing all this different stuff and they have a hard time sleeping and they want to jump from one activity to the other. These people have a lot of air and movement going on. So we tend to jump to doshas, but if we take a step back and see, well, why is that important? These three different categories that we named doshas help us to identify what we are most similar to. And that is where we find our balance. So the Sanskrit words for the doshas, so I just wanted to give a little bit of frame for it.
Yeah.
The Sanskrit names are vata, pitta, and kapha. And those are words that they take a minute. I remember when I first learned Ayurveda, I would say like totally wrong. I would mix them up. It was hard for me to even remember those three words. And I thought, I will never understand anything about Ayurveda. I can't even learn the three doshas. So just know it takes time if this is new for you. So our vata is the one that I described as being more air, more
Right.
movement, right? A little bit lighter in that respect. And they tend to be more because they have more air energy and also some space. They're more in their like spiritual side. These are kind of like your spiritual guides, your spiritual leaders in the world. They love to do a lot of different things. They might have changed careers a whole bunch of times. They tend to flit from thing to thing where they say, oh, they're the ones that are like, oh, shiny, right? And they
Yeah.
might there's a little bit of vata even to when you found our Ayurveda and you were like, "I'm going all in," right? It was that, "Oh, this is amazing. I so wanna do this." Now the ability to go all in involved a little other doshas, right? But that drawing to it immediately going, "Oh my goodness, this is amazing." And that excitement, that's more vata.
Yeah.
And then our pitta is more of that heat, that fire I described, that fiery personality. They just have a lot more ability to kind of create in the world because fire is transformative.
Mm,
Okay. And then our kapha energy, kapha dosha, that's the one that's more of the solid,
yeah.
right? I have a sister that is very kapha and she is like the rock of the family.
Mhm.
Everyone who has problems goes to her because she's the best listener in the universe. And she doesn't like to move physically, but she's like so solid in where she sits emotionally that she
Mm,
is just like Mother Earth energy. So that's where you get that earth part of it. So everyone has all three doshas
right.
but they're not all in the same amounts. So that's basically like just a capstone of what doshas are. And they're really the framework that we look at everything in Ayurveda through. And I feel like it's taking a lifetime to
Mm,
understand them fully because
right.
there's so many nuances to them.
Well, and I think too because and that's actually where I became obsessed for a little while because I'm very much a kappa. I'm very much a
Mhm.
kappa, and I knew that in your videos because I was watching your videos, and I'm like, yep, 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 yep. I'm like, that's me in a nutshell. And then, but then I feel like I had a hard time between, and I know because we're all three between pitta and vata.
Mhm.
So because I feel like I can very much go back and forth. Like I feel like it was
Yep.
very interchangeable to me to figure out what am I more so of, and it's like I don't think so. I think it very much depends on kind of where I'm at or the context of where I'm at that point. I think.
What's great about the doshas is we can look at them from 2 points of view.
Mhm.
We can look at them from what did you inherit? You can think of it that way. What were you
Right.
born with? Your natural born constitution. And I get arguments from clients sometimes about this. It's really funny actually, because they'll say, "Oh no, mine because it doesn't change. Your natural born constitution doesn't change." But people will say, "No, because I'm way different now than I was when I was 20, or I'm way different now than I was then, or I feel different on certain days." So there's 2 kinds of doshic tendencies or makeups. You have the one that is with you for your whole life. It's kind of the real who you are.
Okay.
The goal in life is to stay balanced in those. But I want
Okay.
you to picture if you had a math graph. Okay, we're going to go math for you on a second. So pretend you had a chart and you've got 3 different graphs or 3 different bar lines.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your bar line for vata, pitta, and kapha and how high each of those are is going to be very different than mine. And it's going
Okay.
to be different than your husband's.
Right.
Right. And so when we talk about balance, we're not referring to having them all be flat, even, and level,
Hmm.
right? What we're trying to do in life is to come back to our natural constitutional state that we were born with by balancing those. So, for example, if you have a dominance in kapha dosha,
Yeah.
then that's always going to be higher for you in your natural constitution. But we want to look at, well, where are the other two? We don't need to increase those to make them the same as kapha. We just want those to stay at their natural states. And they may be pretty similar in height as far as the amount you have. And that may be why you feel sometimes more vata, sometimes more pitta, but
Right.
we also have the ability to shift with what's going on around us. And
Yes.
sometimes we do that intentionally. Most of the time it's unintentional. And it's
Mm.
because we're making choices that throw us out of balance, or simply it started raining today and there's more water energy. And
Mm.
water and earth are both kapha. So you might feel like, I just want to snuggle in a cozy and sit on the couch. And I really don't want to get in my car and go to work today because it's raining. Right? So that is your day-to-day, moment-to-moment constitutional balance. So there's 2 different ones. The Sanskrit words for those are prakruti, and that's
Mhm.
your long-term one that stays with you forever, and then the one that changes is your vikruti. The words are not important, but what's important to understand is that who you are never changes truly at a deep level. But who you are in a moment can change, right? Your husband can say something to you and suddenly your pit to fire is like, phew, because he triggered something within you that your fire just went, wow. You may
Yes.
not have that much fire, but suddenly that overwhelmed your kapha because that fire was so high. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it. And I think that sometimes can confuse people when they're trying to figure out what their dosha is, like where you said you were having a hard time
Yeah.
understanding what your dosha was.
And then and once I sort of have that sense of it, then it just became fun for me to figure out who's who. So like my
Mhm.
sister, I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. I'm like, you are Pitta. Like, and then she's like, what does that mean? I'm like, just know that you're a Pitta. And she's like, I don't know what you're saying to me. I'm like, I'm in a deep dive right now. I'll explain when I'm out. You're Pitta. That's why you and me. I get it now. So it almost helped also to provide that insight of relationships and how sometimes I am with this relationship versus this
Mhm.
relationship, my partner, understanding how we collide sometimes, and yet can very much. We've always kind of said we're the yin to each other's yang because we're been together a long time, but we're very different.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'm like, how do we work? Like how do we work? And understanding this in many ways, I'm like, God, that makes sense. Like it
Well,
makes
and
sense.
because you need all 3 doshas to really function properly, when people get that misconception that, one dosha is better than another, that's
Yeah.
also incorrect. There's nothing that's inherently wrong with any of the doshas. And from that point of view, there's nothing inherently right either. It's
Right.
just a state of being. And I think in the business place, if they would work on doshic analysis more before they hired people, it would actually be really useful because then they would bring in team members to fill certain roles that matched what their doshic ability was. And, like, how when you watch a movie and somebody's so casted wrong and you're like, that is not believable. I do not believe that person, that is not the right character or actor for that role. It's typically because they're not matching the doshic energy of the character they're trying to play. And so it comes across as artificial because they're pretending to be something that they're maybe not. And that's why also some actors are always cast in the same type of
In the
role
same role.
because, yeah, they're like the traditional square jaw, handsome pitta. And so then they tend to always be in these, I'm an adventurer and I'm strong and I'm powerful. And if you put them into a role where they're considered like more submissive or more gentle, you have a hard time matching it in your mind because to that's not them, that's the character. So it's fun to watch actors too and go, yeah, I think that was a good casting, or no, not so much a good casting. They really should have Ayurvedic practitioners at movie castings. I think we would be very helpful for them. That will be my next job. I'm going to go apply to that. I will come and be your guide, your assistant there. Then that'd be
When you
funny.
said that, I immediately thought of watch is such a simple way to say I have a real obsession with The Office, and I can't even tell you the amount. I won't share 5 times how many times I've watched that series in each lockdown. And John Kradinsky will always be Jim. Like it doesn't
Oh,
matter what other movies I see him in. I'm like Jim. Like it's like poor guy. Like and I just adore him so much in
well,
real life.
and they tried to cast him in a role. I think he was playing, it was an action hero. It was something that was like a Netflix series. I wish
Oh
I
my
could
goodness,
remember the
yes.
name of it.
Oh goodness, I
You
can't.
you're picturing it, right? But it
I
didn't work because he
couldn't
is
do it.
not dominantly Pitta, right? He is way more Vata, and Vata is the playful, funny Jim that we know from The
Mhm.
Office, not this, like, tough bang bang shoot 'em up, military guy that they cast him in this show. So, yeah, you can see it, and when you start to understand, like, facial characteristics, you can even look at them and go, "Yeah, that's not gonna work so great," but, that's okay. Ayurveda has not infiltrated Hollywood yet.
John
Maybe someday, someday.
John Krasinski, if you ever watch this, just please know that I absolutely adore you. Just
There we
please.
go.
You
Yes.
and Emily. I'm like, call me anytime. Anyway, also, I would love to get into because I'm very fascinated with the Ayurvedic clock. So you
Yes.
have your Pitta time, your Kapha time, and your Vata time.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think I understand it as a whole, but I'm very interested in getting into that a bit more in terms of times of day. If you can get into that a little bit.
Well, what is really fun about the Ayurvedic clock is now modern science is actually catching up finally. And
Oh,
there was a Nobel Prize that was given, I'd have to get you the reference for it, but about circadian rhythms. And it was in direct connection to what we know Ayurvedically about the Ayurvedic clock. And
okay.
I just think that's fascinating. So, this was a study that was done just a couple of years ago. But the Ayurvedic clock helps us to see that the doshas affect more than just our physical body. You
Hmm.
can see the doshas and everything around you, right? There's certain plants that are more vata than other plants. There's animals that are more pitta than other animals, right? So it's everywhere around us, this season's included. But when we look at a clock in the daytime, there's different energies during the day. And I think we're all aware of that, even if nobody ever told you. It
Right.
feels different in the morning when the sun's first rising and you're able to have kind of that fresh renewal as opposed to 3 in the afternoon. And for most people, that's the time where they feel a slump, right? They're kind of like, ugh, could I be done with work already? Where is my coffee? I need something to pick me up to get me through to the evening. And
100.
then suddenly it's 10:30, 11 at night and they're wired and totally awake, even though at 6 p.m. they were falling asleep after dinner. So there's a natural energy that goes on. And the problem with most of us is we don't know what it is. So we don't harness it. And we actually work in opposition to it most of the time. And so we're not utilizing that energy properly. So we break the day down into 4-hour segments. So
Okay.
let's just start in the morning because that will help people with their mental picture of the clock. So just picture your clock. It's 6 a.m. From 6 until 10 a.m., kapha energy dominates. So kapha energy is that earth and that water, a little more of that heavy energy. Now, what's interesting about that is most people wake up in that time.
Right.
And if you were to take a poll of 100 people, just average Joe on the street, how easy is it to get up at whatever time you choose to wake up in the morning? The majority of them are going to feel like it's difficult. Like they're dragging a little bit, right? They might have to snooze the alarm a couple of times. There's not like an enthusiasm to get up. And then you'll have your few that say, "Yeah, no, it's easy, it's no big deal." But the majority of people have a hard time, and it's because that heavy energy is dominant during that time of 6 to 10 in the morning. And
Mhm.
so if we were to look at that and say, "Okay, well, there's a heaviness there. There's a little more lethargy. If I snooze my alarm and I go back to sleep, it's even harder to wake up the second time, and then I wake up and I'm kinda groggy." But
Yeah.
then if you look back on your night, you think, "Well, I kinda woke up around, like, 5, needed to go to the restroom, and then I went back to sleep, but I kinda felt awake at 5."
Hmm.
So perhaps shifting when I wake up in a different doshic time, which we'll talk about in a second, would affect the entire rest of my day and how I felt.
Yep.
Okay. So the best things that you could be doing between that 6 and 10 is, for one, you're awake already. So this, sleeping till 7:15 or 7:30 or 8, I mean, so for me, that would be massively sleeping in, right? I just can't even fathom that. But for the majority of people, that can be a normal time depending on when you leave for work. But when you're waking in that time, you're holding that energy. If instead you woke up before 6 and you move into that 6 o'clock time and you've drank some lemon water, you've got your inner organs working, you've scraped your tongue, which is an Ayurvedic habit that thankfully Western has picked up as well. So you're getting all of that just gross bacteria off your tongue in the morning. You've stepped outside and looked at nature for a minute to connect there. And then you get into some movement. It's the best time of day for you to exercise. And eating breakfast earlier in that time frame is also going to be very helpful for digestion. A lot of people say, "I hate breakfast. It's horrible. I don't want to eat breakfast. I just want to drink coffee and then go to work," or whatever. But creating a habit where you're providing your body something to ignite digestive fire, especially if you never have an appetite in the morning. So maybe
Mhm.
it's like ginger tea. You're going to have ginger tea in the morning, maybe instead of your coffee.
Mhm.
I know coffee is not really loved in Ayurveda. Some
Mhm.
people say, "Oh, well, I'm done closing the book on Ayurveda. Finish with that right now." Right? But we know what it does to the doshas and how it can increase and irritate that
Yeah.
fire energy and also that kind of scattered anxious energy. So
Mhm.
we tend to stay away from it. But that 6 to 10 is really that kapha time. And kapha itself is all about building and preparation. So if you
Okay.
think about what you do in the morning, you're typically preparing for the day, right? Your brain's maybe not quite all firing on all cylinders. Don't send super important emails at that time that you might regret later. Don't have that hard conversation with your spouse. Not a good time to do it, because this is where we're building and kind of creating the whole foundation for the rest of our day. So this is a vital time of day. Do you want to talk about that at all? Do you want me to just keep going? I mean, the clock is so cool. We could talk forever. So I don't want to
No,
take too much time on each
I
one.
definitely wanna get into all 3. I will just for me, that it resonates a lot because in my approach to, Ayurveda, and even, like I said, your podcasts and videos when I was first listening to it, and that's what I heard was to wake up a bit earlier and how we kinda start our day, and I remember my initial thought, and I told you this before, was like, "Nope." I'm like, "Out to lunch." I said, "Nope." And I remember being in the car, I'm like, "Yeah, nope, not gonna happen. Forget it." And I'm like, "I'll do everything else, but I ain't doing that." And it was not until just how this is kismically all connected. It was not until the past few months that I am now getting up around, give or take, like around 5:36, and it has I can't believe I know how I sound because I know what I've said in the past, and I'm going to say it, but it has really changed the trajectory of my day,
Mhm.
my own anxiety, my kids, like how I wake them up now versus how I was waking them up, and sort of how just that interaction between us has set something very different
Yep.
for how the mornings are in the house. Because as a mom, professional career, all that stuff, mornings were probably one of the
Mm.
hardest times of my day.
Mhm.
Is mornings, is getting everyone up and at 'em and getting out the door, all that kind of stuff. So waking up earlier, which I never thought I would be able to do, has really genuinely changed has changed a lot of things for me, and sort of my day to day and my family 1,010%, which I cannot believe I'm one of those people that says it, because like friends have told me, oh, I go to hockey in the morning with my kids at like 5 a.m. I'm like, you guys are honestly out to lunch. I'm like, oh, that's great. But
What
yeah,
I love about it too is it's a lifestyle thing. I
yeah,
think what a lot of people overlook with Ayurveda is they think it's all about the food and the herbs, and so they
yeah,
immediately jump to that, but there are so many lifestyle factors that come into play, and the food is very important as well, but the actual lifestyle is important. So then we start moving through that clock and we're now at 10 a.m. So between
Okay.
10 and 2 is when the fire is highest, and that's when pitta energy rises. And if you just think of where the sun is at different times of the day, it helps you to remember this because the sun is at its zenith, it's the highest typically in the middle of the day. And so depending on where you live and it's difficult if you're in somewhere where it's sunny all the time or it's dark all the time, depending on if you're
Right.
far northern or far southern. And so you really have to work with kind of your body to adjust to that. But for most of the world, if you're anywhere near the equator or north or south of that, you're going to have that noontime be pretty close to the center of the day. And so that's when the fire outside is the highest. It's also when the fire in yourself is the highest. Because just like the tides of the ocean ebb and flow, the doshas ebb and flow based upon what's happening in nature. So when we look at how connected we are in that way, it's just unfortunate that many of us don't take that opportunity to find that, moment to step outside and go, "Oh, the sun is shining. This is beautiful. This is what it feels like when the
Mhm.
fire's highest outside." This is when you want to eat your biggest meal. And
Right.
this is something that we just really have to shift because everybody still likes to have the big dinner, right? This is so traditional now, especially in the West. We have dinner as our big meal, but lunch should be your main meal. And when I say that, it doesn't mean that it's massive, but of the three meals that you eat during the day, lunch should definitely be the largest of the three. And the reason for that is because the fire is higher. So your digestive fire, if you think about your stomach and all that's going on in your digestive tract as a campfire, it's going to be the biggest and most roaring at lunchtime, at the middle of the day. And so what a lot of people will do if they skip breakfast and then maybe they don't eat lunch until like 1 or 2, they've
Mhm.
kind of missed this beautiful arc of energy that their body was providing in order for them to digest it. It's also one of the best times of day, the best time of day to digest things that are difficult to understand. So if you work at a job that you have a lot of complicated things, I know all of us do, right? Even if it's just trying to figure out some new piece of technology, it's like, oh, stress, don't give me that, right? This is the time of day to work on those things. So by 10 a.m., for most of us, if we're working at a job where we're like going to an office or we're doing creative work, or even if we're working from home, which a lot of us do now, this is when you want to start tackling things that require a little more mental energy. So instead of putting off the hard stuff till the afternoon, if there's something that requires a lot of strategy, a lot of deep thinking, a lot of processing of information, you want to be doing it during that 10 to 2 window, but not at the same time as when you're eating. So don't sit down with your lunch and your computer and try to work. Okay, we want to do
Right.
those separate. But
Yeah.
this is the best time of day to have hard conversations. If there are things that, but not right before lunch, because if you're hungry, right, it's not as good. The energy's not, the fire can't go to what it needs to because it's trying to now entice you to eat. So it's better if you do something like 10 o'clock would be a great time, or if you're done with lunch, about 1:30 would be a great time. So before you start moving into that afternoon energy. But
Okay.
what we see with a lot of companies is they'll plan like big meetings or things late in the afternoon as a horrible time to do a strategic planning meeting. We'll talk for a minute about what would be good there. But so 10 to 2 is pitta time. Fire, eat your food, do your hard stuff here. If you have a lot of fire already in your constitution, it's not the best time to go outside and like do physical activity because that can create too much heat for you. I had to learn this the hard way. When I was in massage therapy school, we would do these days that were like 12 hours. And just, I mean, there's such long days of class and practicals, and we'd be doing massage, and it was just a long day. And they'd give us these hour and a half lunch breaks. And because the days were so long, I just felt like I needed to get out and like do something. And I love to run, and it was summertime. And so I would go running in the middle of the day and then eat really quick and then wonder why I felt super sick all afternoon because I was overheated and I didn't give my body time to digest my food. So using that time wisely, and I've got a few clients now that that is sacred time for them. Pitta time, they don't schedule appointments with people that are, things that could be done later in the day that don't require so much mental energy. If they're going to go to a doctor's appointment or something where they're really kind of passively involved or they need to run errands, they're not going to do it between 10 and 2 because that is their focused mental time. So, yeah, there you go. There's Pitta. And then our last one is Vata. And I think Vata's fun. Don't you think Vata's fun? That's probably what drew you to Ayurveda in the
Yeah.
first place anyway.
Yeah. 100% I do.
Yeah. So in the afternoon when we start to feel lethargic, here's a couple comments to this because people think they need a pick me up, right? And it's typically because they didn't wake up early enough, which sounds like a complete contradiction, right? But if you're waking up early enough, you're waking up in Vata time because we get 2 times a day within that 24-hour cycle that each dosha gets to be dominant. So if you're waking up before 6 a.m., you're in Vata time, which is a lighter energy at that point. But if
Mhm.
you didn't wake up early enough, then that kapha starts to weigh you down by the afternoon. And that lethargy that kind of stayed with you makes you more tired, right? So because Vata is a light moving energy, just from what you know, Stephanie, what do you think would be good things to do between that 2 to 6 p.m. time for that
So this is
energy?
so that is my hardest time. So
Mhm.
that's where I'm interested the most actually is that time because that is my crash.
Yeah.
So I crash when every day at work around between 2, 3-ish is when I
Mhm.
crash, and then I come home, and that is when I'll admit it, I binge. So if
Uh-huh.
I had an amazing day of eating healthy and everything was going well, I come home, I need to lock my pantry at that time because I'm tired, I'm cranky, and all I want is carbs. I want chips. Like that's my time. That is my worst. And I say
Yep.
worst, but that is I call it the plunge. I'm like, oh, here we go. I'm coming right down.
Mhm.
And yep.
Do you know why you do that? It's so interesting because this is such a normal thing. And I have days where I haven't managed my energy properly and I'll have that same experience. So it's not as though, anyone's really immune to that because you cannot control the movement of the sun. If you
Yeah.
could control the movement of the sun, you could stop this. So just go outside and yell at the sun until it's fault. The sun's fault.
My
There's an
Instagram time.
there's an yeah, exactly. Well, Vata is interesting because it creates an emptiness. And so when you think about air and ether, ether is also known as space. So those are the two elements that make up vata. And most people don't understand ether very well. It's something that's very etheric. Get that funny Ayurvedic joke. Anyway, so because it's kind of an etheric thing, we have a hard time grasping it. But think of it this way: ether is like a container. So there has to be a container within us to manage the other doshas to hold it. So I literally picture when I think of ether, I picture like a bowl. Now we can talk about it as the space between things as well. I mean, everything has space. The body's more space than it is solid matter. So it's also those spaces in the body.
Mhm.
But from a practical standpoint, I can think of it as a container. And if my container is empty, meaning I've got too much ether, right? It's kind of pushed out the other elements. It's almost like a bowl that has no ability to hold anything, more like a flat plate. It's become flat in that way. Then that etheric energy needs something to fill it. So it creates an empty feeling within us. And this can happen. This is where anxiety comes from. It's
Mm,
this restlessness, right?
mm,
It's like there's no grounding, no solidity to us. And that is why we reach for food and why we want to eat because we're trying to create that feeling of not just comfort. People will say, I just need comfort. It was a hard day. It was stressful.
yeah.
Well, if you didn't have touch points throughout your day to create some grounding, you didn't take that lunchtime moment to create some grounding by sitting, eating calmly, peacefully, maybe walking outside for a minute afterwards, that reconnected you, right?
Mm,
Then you end up in the afternoon totally untethered and your anxiety levels rise and your body's natural, even if you don't think you're an anxious person, that emotion of space rises and we reach for things to create grounding. We don't do it always consciously, right? But there's alternatives to reaching for the food for grounding. Now, if
mm,
you're hungry, you should eat, right? I mean, that is of course, but if we're eating in order to fulfill an emotional or a doshic need, then we don't need the food. We need to turn to practices that are going to create more grounding. And I think we're going to talk about that in another episode, like actual practices. But the best thing too to just know you're just a human and you're having a human experience. And that doshic rise of vata is very, very normal. But then we just start to dissect, well, what did I do to set
yeah.
myself up for the afternoon to have balanced energy? And did I do things that maybe threw that off a little bit? And then always coming back to compassion. Ayurveda is so about non-judgment. Everything is about compassion, and being compassionate with yourself is probably the hardest thing.
Yeah.
And just noticing, okay, I'm reaching for all of this food or this Netflix binging or whatever it is that I'm doing to try and fill that space. Maybe there's something else going on here and having just a pause, even if you do the activity afterwards, even if you still chose to have chips or whatever the thing is, but having a pause in there where you notice what's going on because that's where you come into your higher self and you're not in the ego anymore. You're actually letting yourself observe what's going on, and you're becoming more aware so that maybe the next time you decide not to. And I just think it's great. We get all these opportunities every single 24 hours. We can try it again. It's
Yeah.
great. It's good stuff.
And I think too in this practice, and something that I'm working on, but I'm really starting to understand, is to create practices for yourself
Mhm,
without guilt. And what I mean by that, because I want to be very specific, and I think in understanding Ayurveda and how, like I said, it's been coming up for me a lot in various aspects. And an example would be work in terms of when we eat.
mhm,
So it wasn't until recently that it has been encouraged to eat away from your desk. Because prior to that, I remember it was eating, like, like you're working, if anything, oh, I'll just eat through my lunch, or like I'll just type while I'm eating. And I mean,
mhm,
no one has ever told me to do that explicitly, but it's very implied. And it wasn't, like I said, until recently where I have purposefully removed myself from a space and eaten by myself, or just away from a screen or away from my phone, even
mhm.
scrolling on my phone while I'm
Yep.
eating, making it very purposeful as I can to not do that, and to eat just to eat, and to have that decompressed time for myself. And again, it wasn't until I made it a point to do that that I noticed the difference.
Mhm,
And there's some guilt that comes with that. Well, maybe I have so much to do, or I should be working, or and really having conversations with myself where it's like, nope, it can
mhm,
wait. Nope, that this is fine. And that's sort of, and I think about it, and it's like that has taken me longer than it should have, I think, but so vital in terms of how my day goes. We as a collective should be able to eat, appreciate
mhm,
what we're eating. It doesn't always have to be about what we produce and what we have to produce, and productivity, and what productivity means and what it looks like. And that, I think there's a shift with that in
yep,
terms of how we eat, how we work, separating ourselves at certain times throughout the day, and that be an encouraged thing. Even, like I said, my mornings, allowing myself, I want to say, I think grace is probably the right word.
mhm,
I would be
mhm,
very hard on myself and my kids if it's taking us so long to get ready. I'm like, oh my God, we have to go. And of course, like, we have things to do and places to be. And I understand that. But it's the grace of allowing it. If it takes a little longer this morning, then that's okay. Then we may have to wake up a little bit earlier, which may be kind of poopy. But if it's gonna create
mhm.
that sort of seamlessness in the morning, how much I'm finding and feeling that is so much more important to set the rest, sort of the course of the day. And that has taken a long time to sort of and still does. I mean, we don't have, not every day is a good day, and that's okay. But it's just really what I'm really coming to, I guess, embrace is, it is okay to allow myself time. And that
Mhm.
sounds so, I think, philosophical, and I'm not even trying to be philosophical, but that was such a hard thing for me, where it's like we have, and I very much type A, and my personality is like, no, we have appointments and routines, and no, we have to do this, and we have to be on time, and just allowing myself and my kids the grace of, it's time to eat. We're going to turn that off. We're going to do this together, however big, however small. Like, there's that. There's the mornings. There's that decompression time. Like, it's just allowing pockets of the day
Mhm.
be exactly what it's meant to be, which is time for ourselves, time for each other. It's such a simple idea. And I think it's one of the hardest things that we can do. And then when I was learning this Ayurvedic clock, and what 24 hours and pitta time, understanding all of it. And I was like, wow, that makes sense. Like, it just,
Yep.
it makes sense when you start to understand it and connect it to certain points of our day. So
Well, and
yeah.
there's such a flow that we can find,
Yes.
and it's something that I don't think we ever fully master unless you were living on a mountaintop completely alone. You're always gonna have things that you can look at as an interruption to your flow, but it's being able to find grace within the chaos.
Yeah.
And I had a
Yes.
client that just would feel so guilty. She's like, "I just feel like I shouldn't take all this time for myself. You know, you're
Yeah.
telling me I should meditate and that I should be doing this oil massage and I should be taking time after lunch to go outside." She's like, "I just am so busy. I don't have the time to do it." So we did a little challenge and we just for 1 week, we had her add in her morning routine, you know, add in some of these Ayurvedic practices. And what was interesting is she came back that next week and she said, "It was so hard to do because I felt so guilty that I
Yeah.
was taking away from creating, producing my family, my kids, all these things." She said, "By about day 4, I was starting to, like, feel like I needed it, and by the
Yes.
end of the week, I just don't know how I did it without." And everything went smoother the whole day for her. So it's almost like you're filling, I mean, it's that old analogy with the airplane, you gotta take, you know, breathe in your oxygen mask first before you can help other people. But it's finding the flow that's already there. It's just
Yeah.
tapping into it. And I think going like camping or someplace where you can be without clocks telling you what to do is a beautiful way to start feeling that flowing energy. So if you're
Yeah.
ever home on a day where you don't have a time schedule with the clock, you don't have to be at a certain appointment at a certain time, it's great to just kind of ignore it
Yeah.
and feel what is supposed to happen next. What is my body asking me for next? What is my energy asking me to do next? And then flow into that as opposed to, oh, well, it's this time I have to do this and it's this time I have to do this, right? So, and yes, give yourself space. You deserve time. I mean, that's the only thing that we have as an equal playing field on this earth is we each have the same amount of time. So if you're running around in chaos and raising vata and anxious energy and then you crash at the end of it, you're really not serving anybody.
No. And that is I think where I'm at now, like, where these past few weeks for me have been very much about that and
Mhm.
coming into that. And like I said, it's not perfect every day,
Yep.
but it's appreciating what that flow is.
Mhm.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Like just
Like, that's what this was about. Okay, that's what she was talking about. Should
yeah,
I briefly finish the clock? I feel like we ended at 6, but the day keeps going. So, and I'm sure you had more things to talk about, but the clock really lends itself to a lot of different topics. So, when we hit 6 p.m., we're moving into kapha time again. So now everyone's seeing the trend, right? You get 2 times for each dosha, and it's the same. So 6 to 10 a.m. for kapha, 6 to 10 p.m. for kapha. And then the same pitta's got 10 to 2 during the day and then 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. And
right.
then our vata is coming back to that 2 to 6 in the day and 2 to 6 in the middle of the night. Okay, so it's just they each get 2 times they get to shine or really dominate. And as we move into that 6 to 10 p.m., now's where we want to use that heavy energy. It's almost like one time of the day we want to work to create balance in the energy that's coming in so it doesn't overwhelm us. The other time that that dosha shows up, we want to use that energy. Because in a natural way, like if you had no clock telling you what time it was to go to bed, you had no artificial lights allowing you to stay up super late, right? Your phone suddenly stopped working when the sun went down. If you were able to make that situation happen, your body would tell you when it was time to go to bed because you're letting that natural kapha heavy energy come in. And it's necessary, otherwise, you would never go to sleep. But this is a time it's all about connection. Remember, I was saying kapha is like that loyalty, that Mother Earth energy, all of that solidity. So, this is when we come back from the hustle and bustle of the day and we reconnect. So, if you're living with a family or other people, this is the time to reconnect. If you're living alone, this is a time to reconnect with yourself, right? Maybe it's a slow grounding yoga practice. Maybe it's taking some time to journal. It might be going for a gentle walk outside. This is not necessarily when you should be going for like high power yoga classes. And I never have understood when yoga studios have these classes starting at 8 p.m. that are like hot vinyasa. I'm like, really? Really? Obviously, we don't teach Ayurveda here at all because that
Mm.
is not, we should just only have restore classes at night. We don't need to be doing any hot vinyasa or any of that because we're letting that heavy energy slowly move us naturally into sleep. Now, what we don't want to do that most people do at this time is eat a heavy dinner
Right.
because our fire is diminished and kapha fire is the least of all. Kapha energy does not have strong digestive fire. It tends to smother the fire. Someone who's got a lot of dominant kapha, and I don't know if you experience this because you do have a lot of kapha, but the appetite's not super duper strong, right?
Not
And
really.
yeah, and you can go for longer periods of time, maybe without eating, and you're not suffering, whereas a pitta person's starving. and they're like, "Please feed me every hour and a half. I want food."
Yeah.
So if you throw a whole bunch of food into your belly at this time of day, no matter what dosha you are, it's not going to digest properly. So we want to have this be a light dinner. It's supposed to be more like supper when they used to call it supper because
Right.
it's supplemental. It's supplementing the food needs that you had for the day, all the food you ate, to bring you into the morning. It's just enough to tide you over. You know, when people say that, oh, I'll just eat something to tide me over. Dinner is a tide you over, but most of us look at it as the main event.
And really too, I mean, culturally, even for me, I grew up very European. And it was more about, well, I guess should have been about just us coming together. But it's like, oh, we can come together and eat. And it doesn't have to be huge.
It's
It doesn't
huge
have to be
portions.
super heavy. Like we can sit and eat like
Mhm.
whatever, whatever it is you want that night. But I think that's also the misconception too. Like we can come together without necessarily having to feel
Yeah.
so heavy about it. And also too, that's the time when it's like I said, it's the crash for me where I'm the most tired and that gear up of like having to make dinner so we can
Mhm.
and like yeah, that oh, it's a toughie.
Soup.
It's a
Yeah,
toughie.
go with, like, soup. We'll talk about this on
Yeah,
another episode, but, those lighter foods that are easier to digest, there's nights where I'll just have tea. So I'm like, "I don't really need anything. I'm not hungry, but I wanna sit with
absolutely.
everybody." And so I'll just make a pot of tea, and I'll just drink tea, and they'll have whatever food I prepared for them, and it's
Yes.
fine because, you don't need all this extra food. You don't need that energy when you go to bed. You're going to bed. You should be going to bed.
And being more on that, just being more in tuned and like listening to your body. Because exactly,
Yes.
I will go somewhere and eat because there's food there. I am not
Mhm.
hungry.
Mhm.
So, well, I don't want to be rude or I don't really want that or but we'll eat, right? So
Yeah.
get a habit, eat out of whatever it is. But it's okay sometimes, and that's happened recently too, where I've made something for my kids. I'm not hungry, and I'm actually not going to eat, and I'm going to
Mhm.
sit. I'm going to eat with you, my partner, whomever, and he's like, "You're not gonna eat?" I'm like, "I'm good."
Yeah.
But just again, it's about listening to it and not
Mhm.
just going to kind of that robotic
Yep.
expectation or that sort of pattern of like, "No, I'm gonna eat because it's there, or I have to, or we should." It's like, "Nope,
Yeah.
I think that's okay." And sort of again, just being really in tuned and listening and honoring that.
What a beautiful thing to teach your kids. That
Yeah,
is fantastic because then they learn to listen to their bodies because listening to your body has a lot more to do like, it has a ripple effect because you look at the need we have right now for strong human beings, not physically. I'm talking more like emotionally,
emotional
spiritually, ability to contribute, showing up in society. And if they're able to see that you listen to your inner voice and let it guide the decisions you make, not just with what you're eating, but with everything else you're doing, it gives them a role model, plus it gives them permission
to do the
to
same.
not do what everyone else is doing. And so you're really allowing them to grow up into amazing human beings just by deciding to listen to your body and not eating when you don't need the food. And by then maybe having a conversation with them about it and sharing, why am I not eating food? If they ask you, instead of just saying, oh, I'm just not hungry, just say, well, I'm really working on listening to my body and on being more in tune with what it needs. And right now, it just needs connection with you, but it really doesn't need food. So I'm going to be here with you and just be fully present for you instead of eating something that then is not going to make me feel great later. And so I think it opens us up to so many more deeper conversations with our children or people we interact with so that it becomes less about them feeling, judged that they're eating and you're not eating, which can happen too. But
Yeah,
and sometimes food is the right choice. So it's not even that the food is the topic, it's the listening, like you were saying.
yeah. Well, Heather, I'm going to stop it here because we're going to get into part two. Because I think the information we covered is amazing. And I think people need to genuinely sit with it, understand it, figure out their own dosha, and
Yep.
then from there, kind of work with that. And then in the next episode, just chat with you about nutrition tips in terms of eating for your dosha, understanding what that even means or looks like. So I'm going to
Perfect.
pause this here, but stay tuned for part two, people.